This film tells the story of Gilbert Bayes, one of Britain's lesser-known artists whose long and eventful career connects him to the arts and crafts movement, Art Nouveau, Art Deco and ultimately modernism. If you stroll around London today, you'll almost certainly see examples of his work, but you won't have to necessarily visit a gallery. But who was Gilbert Bayes? What were his techniques and influences, and where were his roots? British designer Wayne Hemingway, an admirer of Gilbert Bayes' work, picks up the story far away from London.
A remote North Country village, situated at the borders of Greater Manchester, Lancashire and West Yorkshire, and where the tree line of the Calder Valley gives way to the upland moors of the Pennines. The village was the birthplace of painter, etcher, engraver Alfred Bayes. Raised here in the middle of the 19th century, Alfred Bayes became best known as a book illustrator, and in 1863, after marrying a local girl, he left West Yorkshire and headed for London. Initially, things in London were unsettled for Alfred Bayes and his young wife, but eventually, after several moves, they found a home in the Kentish town area. The Bayeses eventually had 4 children. Their youngest son was Gilbert, born on the 4th of April 1872 in a house long since demolished. His sister Jessie remembers how, as a boy, Gilbert was always making things.
Gilbert always had craftsman's fingers, you know. He did little sketches, pictures, silhouettes, and for me, he once made a wonderful toy castle that stood in a model village. And when we started doing our puppet shows, he made a little theatre for the puppets to perform in. The other day, he brought home some sticks of cobbler's wax. He's been using it to make little sculptures, and one of them is on display at the Arts and Crafts Gallery in Regent Street. Next year, he's been asked to exhibit at the Royal Academy. We're all so proud of him. He's only 16.
During Bayes' formative years as an artist, in the late 19th century, a movement got underway that was simply entitled New Sculpture. It followed a long and more stylised period known as neoclassicism, and allowed sculptors to explore a wider range of subject matter and techniques. New sculpture also allowed for a greater degree of naturalism. Gone were the ancient figures from mythology and literature, and in came new attitudes to modelling, materials and form. Amongst the new sculptors were George Frampton, Edward Onslow Ford, Frederick Pomeroy, Alfred Drury, and one of the best known examples of the genre, Alfred Gilbert.
Gilbert Bayes was very much part of New Sculpture, but he's also associated with the arts and crafts, and much of his early work isn't strictly speaking sculpture at all. It's up to the artist, Bayes once said, to serve the community, not to make feeble things that won't function. In 1899, at the age of 27, Bayes won a £200 travelling scholarship and, like many young sculptors, he headed for Italy and France. On his travels he was introduced to some delightful public squares, gardens and fountains, including the Mercato Vecchio in Florence and the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. The Europe trip left its mark on Bayes, and in a lecture given some years later he stated that
"It is a fact that the love of moving water is ingrained in all of us. It's one of the delights and wonders of childhood, and it lasts on throughout life. Sometimes it's the swirl of the sea, the great waterfall, or the quiet rivers of nature, or sometimes it's the spray from a man-made fountain, falling in diamonds from the sun."
Once back in London, one of Bayes' earliest commissions came, when in January 1909, the engineering firm Price and Reeves began work on an embankment wall along the River Thames. At a cost of £58,000, the wall was designed as both an impressive frontage and as part of the substructure for London County Council's new headquarters building on the South Bank. The project's architect was Ralph Knott, and in October 1909, Bayes was chosen as one of the 3 artists to submit designs for a set of ornamental mooring rings to be fixed to the front wall just above the high water mark. The Builder magazine, dated the 11th of September 1911, reports that
the river wall presents a formidable appearance, but progress is slowly being made. Mr. Leithheart's drawing depicts a pair of bronze chain supports to be placed on each side of granite blocks that make up the main frontage. The horses' heads, of which there are 4, are slightly varied in design and will be skillfully worked to a square measuring 3'6". Mr. Ralph Knott, the architect, is responsible for the design of the wall itself, and Mr. Gilbert Bayes will be the sculptor of the supports.
That Ralph Knott favoured Bayes' designs was undoubtedly a factor in awarding him the contract, but what no one, it seems, foresaw was just how ubiquitous and high profile the mooring rings were set to become. Whilst the horses' heads remained at the original 4, the smaller, less grandiose lions' heads, also by Bayes, managed to somehow multiply and spread themselves out along the river in both directions, and on both sides. It's a known fact that the constructors Price and Reeves managed to complete the river wall almost £5,000 under budget. Perhaps Ralph Knott or his chief engineer, Maurice Fitzmaurice, simply decided on more lions' heads as a way of making use of leftover money. A familiar sight and numbering well over 200, they begin at Vauxhall, continue on through Southwark and Westminster, spreading right up to Blackfriars and the city. Sadly, Ralph Knott died young and never saw his beloved County Hall project fully completed, but by way of tribute in 1932, Bayes was called upon to design and produce a commemorative bronze plaque to Knott. Beautifully executed and showing the young architect in profile, it was set up and is still to be found at County Hall's former members' entrance, now the site of a modern hotel. 100 yards behind me is County Hall and the Ralph Knott panel, and over the edge here, facing the river, are more of Bayes' lions' heads. These are all from 1910, and magnificent they are. Then over there, on my left, is the headquarters of the London Fire Brigade. Officially opened in 1937 by King George V, the Fire Brigade building was again designed by one of London County Council's top architects, on this occasion E.P. Wheeler. During the 30s, Bayes had been kept busy with a demand for architectural panels, and now he supplied 5 more as decorations to the building's riverside elevation. Sadly though, the panels seem to get lost amongst the huge austere frontage. Inside, however, there's something much more impressive. In 1937, and again in 1938, Bayes came here to install 2 separate stone and bronze memorials which dominate the main lobby. The panels are flanked by lists which honour the fallen firefighters from both World Wars and show a real sense of what commentators perhaps meant when they described Bayes' artistic approach, saying that his work had a rarely seen, considered quality about it.
One of Bayes' virtues is his artistic organisation. Everything is considered, not only the nature of the materials and the character of the particular setting, but also the climate, the conditions of life, even the artistic perceptions of the people most likely to be in contact with the work. To the general current he comes as a sort of contributory rivulet, and when you go into his studio you are struck by the variety of materials and the wide range of scale from the miniature to the colossal. Charles Marriott, The Studio Magazine, March 1917.
But there's also another reason why this spot's crucial in the development of the Gilbert Bayes story. Just around the corner, in Black Prince Road, is an old factory building that represents Bayes' involvement with a company that remains world famous. Up until 1956, this was where Royal Doulton had their much celebrated Lambeth Works. Here today, at what's left of the old Lambeth Works, evidence of great Dalton potters like George Timworth can still be seen and felt. One of the remarkable things about the Dalton Company was their mastery over both the domestic and industrial. From sewer pipes, chimney pots and electrical conductors, they easily made the transition to delicate art figures and decorated tea sets. In 1923, Bayes joined a growing band of sculptors that experimented using Dalton salt glazed stoneware and found that as a potential medium it had lasting and very definite qualities. Ceramicist Kevin Millward is an expert on the history of salt glazing.
Daltons built their reputation on the salt glazed stonewares. The Lambeth stoneware was very often hand thrown and turned and then salt glazed, whereby you put your pots into the kiln and then at the crucial point where the body is maturing you throw common salt into the firebox of the kiln. Damp salt, just wrap it in paper and throw it into the firebox. And the salt volatilizes, that is, it forms a gas, travels through the kiln and tries to find something to attach itself to. And it lights silica. Stoneware bodies and all clay bodies are high in silica. So the salt attaches itself to it and draws the silica to the surface and forms a glaze on the surface of the pot. And if you keep throwing it in for long enough and building it up high enough, you get the characteristic orange peel finish that you see on Dalton Lambeth ware.
The lure of stoneware is experienced by most who attempt the craft of the potter. The mysterious happenings of the open kiln, the subtle and harmonious blending of colours, and the chances of surprise are all parts of the attraction. Stoneware's extreme hardness, durability and resistance to temperature favour those in search of colour schemes more robust and striking than those provided by enamel, ivory or bronze. Daltons of Lambeth are producing decorative, artistic stoneware of the highest excellence, and fine examples of this treatment of model subjects can be found in the recent work of Mr. Gilbert Bayes.
Oxford Street, the heart of London's busy shopping district. On an average day, up to 100 people a minute will pass this spot. They'll also pass this magnificent 11-foot high bronze, gold and ceramic clock, which has stood here keeping count since 1931. The Queen of Time is one of the many high-profile works produced by Bayes at his Maida Vale studio not far from here. This well-known department store actually proved to be a generous client for Bayes, and his work here included involvement with 2 mosaics, a bronze floor panel, an exquisite silver casket, and a memorial plaque which now takes pride of place in the first floor cocktail bar. The bronze plaque was commissioned for the store's 21st birthday celebrations in 1940. On the top is a portrait and dedication to the store's owner, Gordon Selfridge. On the lower panel is a horse being led by its rider. For Bayes, the horse was a recurrent, almost iconic theme. The clock outside is spectacular. The Queen of Time is 11 foot high. Its main character stands on the prow of a ship. In one hand she holds a figure of progress, and in the other an olive branch. Contemporary postcards from the time proclaimed it one of the sights of London and London's newest meeting place under the clock at Selfridge's. With the Dalton connection now in place, sculptors found that they had the best of both worlds, bright, vivid colours and a frost-proof salt-glazed finish which was ideal for outdoor work such as decorative tiles, nameplates and coloured inlays like those used by Bayes on the Selfridge's clock.
Whilst the colours were bright and vivid, Bayes' state of mind was becoming increasingly gloomy. One of the ways he managed to lift his spirits was to spend time in his own garden, where he would often sit reading detective novels and writing letters.
He was a firm believer that gardens had a positive effect on one's spiritual and emotional self. The St Pancras Humanist Housing Association, here in Somerstown, North London, shared this idea and came to be known as one of the first housing societies with any real sense of social policy. Living up to their slogan, "Housing is not enough," they threw caution to the wind, demolished the Somerstown slums, burnt everything and started from scratch. When these estates reopened in 1932, they included provision for a nursery school, a loan club, a children's holiday scheme, a summer camp and a grassroots approach to the problems of high-density housing that had rarely been seen. When architect Ian Hamilton also decided to introduce communal gardens and courtyards, he called upon Bayes to supply ornamental stoneware features to decorate with. These window reliefs, for example, set like jewels in the brickwork and they provide colour all year round. Then up there you've got that magnificent clock with 4 chubby characters clinging to its face, representing the 4 seasons. This is one of my favourite bits. The developers have even allowed Gilbert Bayes to use his sculptural skills on washing line posts. He's gone back to using one of his favourite themes, galleons. In other courtyards he's used Christmas carols, children's nursery rhymes and even the lives of the saints. In all, several hundred of these salt-glazed stoneware decorations were produced. Made at the Dalton Pottery between 1931 and 38, several of them were also shown at exhibitions. Priced at between 6 and 8 guineas, a few were sold and later became ornaments in private gardens. Bayes' work on the St Pancras housing project was to prove invaluable a few years later, when he was asked by Daltons to produce a magnificent 50-foot-long stoneware frieze for their newly constructed admin building. Dalton House, recognised as one of the finest Art Deco buildings in London, was designed in 1939 by T.P. Bennett and was clad entirely in architectural ceramics. The building was sold in 1971 and remained empty until demolition work started unexpectedly in 1978. Royal Dalton suddenly began receiving telephone calls from concerned members of the public, alarmed at the imminent destruction of the famous frieze. Eventually, and with Royal Dalton's backing, historian Paul Atterbury emerged with a team of volunteers from the Ironbridge Gorge Museum in Shropshire. In wintry conditions, Atterbury and his team successfully managed to rescue the frieze from the clutches of the demolition squad and transported it back to Ironbridge for vital cleaning and restoration work. The Art Deco building, Dalton House, was sadly lost forever, but Bayes' stoneware frieze eventually returned to London and now hangs over one of the main staircases in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Pottery through the ages was done by Bayes in his distinctive low-relief style and shows potters at work in 8 separate periods and locations. In October 2004, the Victoria and Albert Museum, with generous help from the Gilbert Bayes Charitable Trust, also decided to reopen a grand first-floor arcade and to dedicate the space to Gilbert Bayes and his memory. The room's main display is an overview of what must be some of his finest work.
English Heritage have also paid tribute with the unveiling of a blue plaque to commemorate the house in northwest London where he lived and worked until his death in 1953.
He worked alongside the artists at Dalton who used to make the blue ceramic plaques. He was lured there by the blue ceramic colour. So for me it seems to be very fitting that a blue plaque should go in his honour. I'm sure he would never have realised that this would one day be his fate.
During the last years of his life, in a fit of depression exasperated by his wife's illness and a general gloom surrounding rationing and taxation, Bayes destroyed a great deal of his work. In a final act of defiance, plasters were smashed, drawings torn up and notebooks burnt.
Although one of Britain's lesser known artists, Gilbert Bayes still produced an exceptional and high-profile diversity of work. His career spans 65 unbroken years, and along with others, he has contributed to a London cityscape that at times feels like a huge, open-air gallery.